Okay, so again, thank you all for joining us on this, the final day of the 2020 University of Maryland Symposium on Environmental Justice and Health Disparities. This is our 6th symposium. As we've done for days 1 through 3, we're going to begin this morning with a land acknowledgement. So, every community owes its existence and strength to the generations that have come before it. Generations who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy into making the history that has led to this moment in this time in this place. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to migrate from their homes in other places in a hope for a better life. And some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical in building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. Here at the Siege Lab, we believe it is important to create dialogue to honor those that have been historically and systemically disenfranchised. So we acknowledge the following truths that are often buried. Number 1, the existence, histories, and legacies of North America's indigenous peoples have all but been erased from American institutions, its consciousness, and mainstream society. Number 2, we at the University of Maryland College Park are on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people who were among the first in the Western Hemisphere. Oops. Number 3, we are on the indigenous lands that were forcibly and violently taken from the Piscataway people by European colonists. And number 4, we humbly pay respects to the Piscataway elders and ancestors. So please take a moment to now and throughout the day to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, and resettlement that bring us together here, and also consider how you can act to reverse these legacies and commit to the resilience of honoring our Native peoples. Thank you. So now, once again, welcome to day 4 of our 2020 program. As we near the finish line for this year, I want to take a moment to reflect on the discussions we've had over the last 4 weeks. On day 1, we heard public health experts and community leaders speak about how COVID-19, systemic racism, and the ongoing climate crisis are ravaging communities of color, and how, yet, we remain resilient. I'm grateful to say that we will be ending today with some of the same thought leaders and voices that we started with on day 1, bringing us full circle. On day 2, Jackie Patterson of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program, along with the help of Brother Bob Marley, told us the meaning of trouting on the wine press for much too long, and gave us a crash course in breaking the systemic shackles of oppression. We also convened our 2nd government report back panel on EJ issues in the DMV region, holding our elected and appointed officials accountable for moving our communities forward. On day 3, our panelists from several charitable foundations spoke to the barriers and opportunities in getting environmental justice work funded. Also on day 3, we heard more NAACP leaders, both near and far, speaking on their grassroots movements to protect communities of color from climate inequity. And all throughout, we've had incredible sessions that I do not have time to call out individually, but these recordings will all be posted to our website and available for posterity. So now looking to the day ahead, by now you're probably aware that I am not Dr. Jacoby Wilson. He is currently attending a funeral for his mother-in-law in South Carolina, but he sends his thanks for all of your participation in the symposium. And we on the steering team ask that you please send your positive vibes, positive vibrations to him and his family today. Today's program will begin with the youth panel as we hear from the future voices of the environmental justice movement. And following this plenary, there will be 3 sets of concurrent sessions. I've posted the links for all of these sessions in the chat. We will periodically keep posting these links for your convenience so you have quick access to them. During the concurrent sessions, this main room will serve as a help desk, and the wonderful Salem Fasil will be here to answer any questions that you have via the chat. We will close out the day with a critical discussion of the JEDI principles, which, if you don't know, stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and how they are or are not being applied across the environmental fields. So finally, last but not least, I definitely have to thank all of our sponsors without whose support we would not be able to hold this event. So thank you to the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice, CHEJ, the Socially Responsible Agricultural Project, the University of Maryland School of Public Health, the University of Maryland Institute for Applied Environmental Health, the University of Maryland Baha'i Chair, Choose Clean Water Coalition, the Chesapeake Bay Trust, NAMITI, the Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center, SYSINC, Earth Justice, the Union of Concerned Scientists, and the Sierra Club. And also, this is the last, but the truly last thing. I have to stop and thank our symposium steering committee and volunteers. So thank you very much to Joe, Salem, Ngazi, Rami. I have to switch over to another list here. Elizabeth, Sydney, Alyssa, Daniel, Amon, Anandita, Jirai, Zaria, Eileen, Ariel, Nasif, Hallelujah, Denise, Naya, Nasif. I already said Anandita, Bright, Rohan, and Stephanie. It takes a village to make a symposium come together. And so I'm incredibly grateful to all of them and grateful to all of you. So without that, I've run 1 minute over my opening time. We're going to transition now to the first session of the day, the youth panel, Voices of Environmental Justice. So with that, I'm going to ask our panelists to turn on their cameras so we can get started.
Yeah, that's not letting me turn on my camera.
Oh no. Okay. Let's see if this will work. Giovanni and Diana, are you having similar issues? Oh, here we go. Excellent. Oh, you're now, oh, but you're all muted. Sorry. Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. We are not able to be joined by Wawa. She had a scheduling conflict at the last minute. So it's, I'm happy to introduce though, our three panelists for today. And I will just give a brief introduction. So we have Faith Taylor of our very own University of Maryland and of my alma mater, University of Tampa. Sorry, pulling up the bio. Faith is now working to obtain a master's degree in marine estuary and environmental sciences with a focus on environment and society at the University of Maryland. She's excited about her role within the ETE Scholars Program. She looks forward to connecting with students and promoting sustainability and environmental justice here on campus at the University of Maryland. And actually, as we're already running behind, I am going to let the other panelists actually, with this first question, we'll do kind of self-introductions. I got kind of excited because Faith is one of my friends. But thank you all for joining. We're lucky to have youth leaders from all over the country joining us here to discuss environmental justice, the uprising against racism in the United States, and more. So I'd love to begin with some brief introductions. So if you can tell us what brought you to the environmental justice movement and what organizations you're involved with. So Faith, since I introduced you already, I'm gonna shift you to going last and start with Giovanni.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Giovanni Hernandez. I'm 19 years old and I'm from the Bay Area in California. Right now I'm currently the Director of Education for the National Children's Campaign. And I think what brought me most to the environmental justice movement is really just the fact that people of color, BIPOC communities aren't being included in the discussion and in decision-making rooms. And I think that's why I'm honored to be here in a group, in an environment that welcomes that.
Thanks. Diana?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Diana Fernandez. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this conversation today. I'm honored to be here. I've probably been passionate about environmental justice starting from the time I was in middle school, maybe around the time I started high school. For my first 2 years of high school, I attended a private boarding school. And this was, you know, an independent PWI school in Northern Virginia. And so coming from the city where I'm from, which is 94% Hispanic and a working class community, I definitely had to adapt to a different environment in an upper class neighborhood, and that brought a lot of changes on me. For the first time in my life, in my without a doubt privileged life, I began to see how racism and classism actually impacted my family and my community. And obviously, this isn't anything new, but it's been happening our entire lives. But it took that change in environment for me to realize that I had to do something about it. I'm currently an organizer for the National Children's Campaign, along with Giovanni. And within this organization, I'm able to advocate for the very issues that impact my community and facilitate conversations regarding environmental and racial justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Faith.
All right. Hi, I'm Faith Taylor. I'm a second-year master's student at University of Maryland College Park. I'm involved with Black Graduate Student Union and 17 for Peace and Justice on campus. And my thesis work also focuses on environmental justice. So how I got involved in doing EJ work was in undergrad. I studied marine science biology, and I was just really kind of disturbed that the way like certain issues about like class, race, gender were just never brought up in the conversations we had about environmentalism and conservation. And we rarely ever in my classes discussed who's most impacted and why certain groups are more impacted than others. So that's when I knew that was the type of work that I needed to be more involved in moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you all. So getting into our first question for the session. From the Little Rock Nine to the student protests of 1968 and civil rights movement, climate strikes still going on, to the late great Reverend John Lewis, youth have always pushed towards social progress. So how can young people today who are interested in environmental justice contribute to this movement? And how are you motivating them to do so? And so I'll start with Giovanni on this question.
Hi, I'm so sorry. Could you repeat the question? You cut off a little bit.
Oh, sorry about that. No problem. So we youth have always been on the leading edge of seeking change and making change. So in this current time, with what we're dealing with COVID, with the climate crisis, with systemic racism, how do you see youth getting involved? How can youth get involved if they want to but aren't sure how to? What's your take on this landscape?
You know, I think one of the biggest things that, to start off, thank you for that question. I think it's extremely important, especially for young people to be having. I think the biggest thing we can do is just showing up to places where people least expect it. I like to say, do the unexpected, not the expected, especially for young people and young people of color. I think that's extremely important. We need to be in these places where decisions are being made, where policies being drafted. But I think one of the things that I also like to include to young people who want to get active is make sure to uplift other young people who may not feel comfortable doing the exact same thing you're doing. Our responsibility as young people is not just to create and promote social change, but it's also to uplift other communities as well, whether that be young people or elderly people as well. I feel like that's a responsibility we need to have as young people because, as mentioned previously, as future leaders, as current leaders, we need to be making sure we're creating that inclusive environment we're constantly fighting for.
Thanks. Diana?
Well, to tell you the truth, I was honestly surprised to find out how easy it is to get involved in movement building and grassroots organizing. Last summer here in Miami, this youth-led organization called This Is Your Hour organized a climate summit in Miami, which is the first time I had ever seen something like this happen near me. And that was all it took for me to get eager to get involved. I think youth can play a really important role, not only getting involved in these local organizations, but also by doing their part to advocate for the issues that they care about the most and impact them the most. One of the most important things to remember, especially in the time that we're in right now, is that our vote certainly does matter. Even if you're under 18, you can't legally vote, it's important to encourage others to vote. The National Children's Campaign, where Giovanni and I both organize in, along with This Is Your Hour, put on this great campaign called Vote for Our Future. I'm actually wearing the sweatshirt right now. And it basically educates youth in the Midwest on climate change and the importance of voting. And I feel like that's one of the most important things that we have to do to change, what we can about these issues. And the last thing I want to say to any young person that's listening is to not be silent. Do not be silent in the face of injustice. Do not let people silence you. Always speak up for what you believe in. And it took me so long to realize that I actually had the power to change what I didn't think was right. I spent too long watching my community suffer while being silent, and I'll never make that mistake again.
Thank you. Faith.
So for me, I will say that I think the most important part is that there's a lot of people who don't even know these issues exist. You know what I'm saying? Like, these issues are not mainstream topics. They don't really make the news, especially the intersectional nature of environmental justice work. So a lot of people don't know that these things are happening in their own backyard or who these issues are actually being impacted. So I think that, and that can make it really hard for people to connect with an issue that you didn't know existed in the first place. So we have to do better about making sure that we're bringing up these type of conversations, even when it feels a little bit uncomfortable to mention that we're not all impacted by issues in the same way. And how can we address that to get more people aware to start with? Because I know for my own self, like, I was very ignorant to these issues until halfway through my college career, unlike you two who are a little bit younger than I am. But spreading that awareness sooner, I think, would be really, really helpful to getting more young people involved in doing this type of work.
And I'd like to dig in a little deeper here, since Diana brought up the topic of voting and political power and youth power in this space. Giovanni or Faith, can you kind of speak to what Diana is saying about the importance of voting there and getting, because it's one thing to know that voting is important, but then where do you go from there? Where do you take it?
Would you like me to go ahead?
Sure.
Well, I think one of the key important things was mentioned, I think, was really just being educated on the issues. I think that's one of the key factors when it comes to voting. We have the right to vote, and we need to continue protecting it and expanding it. But I think it really comes down to what we know, what's going to be on the ballot. I know that's a lot of things that young people especially are very confused when it comes time to voting. So I think the most important thing is being educated on what's on the ballot, because the reality is there's so much misinformation on how to vote on certain measures, what's on the ballot, what the ballot does. And it's not just done like out of mistake, it's done on purpose. It's meant to distract us, it's meant to mislead us, and it's meant to make us do the wrong thing. So I think that's the most important thing, is where we get our information and being educated on the topics.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that not knowing how, like, what's on the ballot, and when you do get your ballot, they can be pretty lengthy. And I know some people just don't vote altogether just because they don't know what's on there and they don't want to make the wrong choice. So making it more accessible, that you do have time, you can take your time to actually research the candidates, make sure that the people you're voting for actually have stances that you support. Like, you don't want to be at the poll just picking names because they sound good without actually knowing where people stand on these issues. And I think it's also important to know that, like, the general election gets a lot of publicity, but most people experience effects like at the local level. So it's important to make sure that you're involved and not just voting for the president, but seeing like who's running for seats in your school system. Like, all of those things are going to impact you daily in addition to these large elections. So just being more involved in, I think voting is good, but it's also just the first step of activism. So I think that even when you do vote, like, you can do more. Like, there's still more that you can do to be involved with your community and make your voice heard other than just voting, in addition to voting. But that's a step. And like you said, like, not all people can vote as well. So making sure that if that's something you can't do for a variety of other reasons, from like voter disenfranchisement for those previously convicted to being underage. So there's a lot of reasons why, like, you legitimately might not be able to vote. So making sure that you still feel empowered to make your voice heard and get your opinions out there in other ways is ideal.
Excellent. I absolutely agree. And this kind of gets us transitioned over to our next topic, thinking about, Faith, what you're saying in terms of there are these higher level kind of spotlighted issues that or offices that we focus on when other things kind of slide by. And so this next question is more about with regard to the environmental justice movement, health disparities, climate equity. What do you, as youth leaders in the movement, what do you see as the issues that your peers are taking up that some of the older folks in the older generations in the EJ movement might not be focusing on, or might not even feel they have the need to address? So I'll start this question off with Diana.
Well, for starters, there's no question that youth are more involved in the climate change movement because we realize that the actual burden of climate change falls on our generation since it's going to impact us the most. But I still feel as though we've also taken the lead on a lot of issues because we actually realize that we have the potential to change them. I can only speak on my experiences, but I've noticed a few things about the older generations, especially like, you know, immigrants like my family. My parents came to this country to escape oppression at the hands of the Cuban government. They lived in a dictatorship and they spent their entire upbringing feeling powerless to what was going on around them. And they came here for their children to have opportunities that they didn't. And well, I realized that I was born in a democratic country, one where the power is in the hands of the people. If you don't like something, tell your elected officials. If your elected officials aren't doing anything, vote for new representation. If the problem still isn't getting fixed, you know, hell, run for office. Maybe this isn't the way everyone sees it, but I do have faith that youth can change the world. You know, take it from me. I want to run for office one day.
Yes, go for it. Giovanni?
Yeah, I think this really just comes back from, especially as Diana mentioned, it comes from past experiences. I know when I wanted to start getting involved, my parents were like, no, just, it's okay how things are, just lay low, you know, because it was that fear of where they came from too, that speaking up wasn't the traditional way. And I took the initiative of doing that because I saw young people taking the initiative of doing that. But when it comes to what young people are doing differently, I think one of the biggest things isn't really a certain issue or approach. I think it has to do more with the approach taken by previous generations. It's a one-eye narrow lens. I think what we're doing is incorporating the intersectionality of all these issues and really taking that aspect that we're taking elements that were previously made and efforts that were commonly made before, and we're just making it into a collective. We're building coalitions. That's something that we've seen before, but not on this scale where we're really integrating other aspects and other people from other communities. I think that's the biggest thing, that ultimately it will reform education, healthcare, we will expand civil rights, and we will obviously address climate change because it is a reality.
Thank you. Faith?
Okay, yeah, I definitely agree. I think that the previous generations of EJ activists had different goals than we do today. Like at that time, like people didn't even want to acknowledge that there were disparities between groups. So that was what really needed to be addressed then, is like there are different people are targeting pollution, people are disenfranchising certain groups purposefully. So that was kind of where like that started. And I think now there's definitely a lot of issues that we are focused on, just because we have, I want to say like more range, because those things, they've already done that work of like making it known like this is an issue. And now we have the flexibility to look at the intersections of these issues. So like there's like when you talk about environmental justice, that includes mass incarceration is an EJ issue, energy justice is an EJ issue, food sovereignty is an EJ issue, having good schools in your area is an EJ issue, air quality is an EJ issue, climate change is an environmental justice issue. So we're now able to, you know, look at these things holistically and see how different groups, even subgroups within a group, are being impacted. So I think this generation is big on intersectionality.
I agree, Faith. And kind of going off of that tangent. So in the last question, I asked you guys to discuss the differences, and I want to bring it back. And we need intergenerational collaboration, of course, in all things, but especially in these movements against oppression and systemic racism. So now, what do you see as kind of the points of concord or agreement, of strong agreement between generations, and how can we move those sentiments forward and kind of move together as one? And so I'll go to Diana first with this one.
Well, I feel as though there are a lot of things that we can agree on because, a lot of people, like, regardless of what your political stance is or how old you are, I feel like we can still agree that some issues are just issues, like they still affect us, whether it's, climate change, whether it's environmental justice issues like Faith mentioned, like there's so many, whether school is in your area, mass incarceration, just health disparities, like all of these things affect us. So we still can't deny that these issues are prevalent in so many areas. And I feel like youth generations and older generations can work together to put a stop to them. It doesn't have to be an issue where only youth take part in it. It can be something intersectional because at the end of the day, it's still affecting us. I feel as though it's just really important to facilitate these conversations with, your parents or your family members, older people around you, to facilitate these conversations and make sure that you come to an understanding. Because a lot of people, like I can speak for myself, but my parents, like, because of language barriers and because they're immigrants and they live in this like very specific community in Miami, they might not be aware of all these issues because of the lack of information, whether it's because they speak Spanish or because we live in this small community in Miami. So I try my best to educate the people around me, without judgment, just educate people and to share what I think is most important to me. And that's a way that we can work together.
Thanks. Giovanni?
Yeah, I think Diana really just mentioned some key points that I wanted to really continue on. I think previous generations and our generation really know that we do need some change. We do know the issues. We just have different perspectives and approaches that we want to do. But I think it really comes to ground that these issues shouldn't be partisan issues or political issues. These are life and death issues. These are issues about equality and access to resources that our communities desperately need right now and have needed for a long time. But I think the main goal we should be doing, of course, is I always am thankful for support from adult allies and adult members in previous generations, because from their experiences, we've been able to adapt the way we build coalitions and really fight for really just social changes. I think the biggest thing we can do is really just learn from them, learn how they did it and say, okay, how can we improve this? How can we make this better? I think that's the biggest thing. And that really ties into what Diana mentioned about really just informing people about what we do, how we do it, and with who we're going to do it with.
Thanks. Faith, you're up.
Yeah, I agree. I think it helps to see that we're all on the same team. You know what I'm saying? Like people who were fighting for these issues then and people who are still fighting for these issues now. So we're not as divided as we seem, even though there's different approaches to getting the work done, that knowing that at the end of the day, we're all rooting for the same things. Like we all want the same levels of equity. We're pushing for the same goal. So seeing that we do have those common understandings, and it has to be a multi-pronged approach. Like there's no right or wrong answers. Like it's not all black and white with the way that we should approach certain issues. So I think that knowing that there's merit to what both sides are saying, and that you have to find some sort of combination with of approaches, because every situation, all communities aren't the same. So you have to keep that in mind, that it's not one size fits all. So being open to listening to other perspectives, I think would help, because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to serve communities that are being disproportionately harmed. So seeing the best way to do that for that given community it takes, like Yan said earlier, even just organizing the symposium takes a village. So to do EJ work, it definitely takes a lot of incorporation from multiple different people. So just keeping that in mind, that everything's not going to be like, this is the best, like there's only one right answer. There's going to be multiple right answers, and it's going to depend on the situation.
Definitely. This next question, I think, is actually very near and dear to my heart, because it's something that I struggle with internally and externally. And so one of the roles that youth are playing today is really driving these more progressive social causes and incorporating them into the environmental justice movement. And so we're talking about intersectionality, which has already been brought up by you all. So what role do you see for youth for yourselves and youth more broadly, fighting against police brutality, school to prison pipelines, systemic racism, gender violence, violence against LGBTQIA+ community, xenophobia, the list goes on. Why is it important that we take this intersectional approach to the work? So I'm going to lead off actually with Faith, because I see her vibing, and it looks like you got something ready to go.
Yeah, I like this question a lot. I think when we see these issues, just the way that we have to approach them, we need a lot of stakeholders to be engaged. And you know what I'm saying? And I think we also have to understand the system that we're living in has worked for hundreds of years to disenfranchise certain people. So you have to know that that's a system you're operating in. That's a system you're getting educated in. It's everywhere. Like, it's not just isolated events when we're talking about these things. So it's going to be present in microaggressions, outward, just like violence against certain groups. It's everywhere, which can be kind of overwhelming. But I think acknowledging that, okay, it's not just this one isolated event. We need to really see how we can correct the system that allows for these oppressions to exist. And that's the system that we're living in. So if we're talking about police brutality, we have to look at why are we living in a system that creates a space for these people to abuse power in this way and have no repercussions. So you have to start looking at it from that lens and seeing like, okay, where are we and how can we change the system? Because it's not just a few bad actors. It's within the system that we're living in. Even if we fix like oppression, I think it's just going to manifest itself somewhere else in another way. So like, we got rid of slavery, then we started mass incarceration and forced prison labor. So it's the same oppression. It's just with a new face. So you have to really fix that broken system that allows for these types of injustices to happen on a system-wide scale. So I think knowing that, and that's where I think is a little bit different now for the youth, is that we have, because of all the work that's been done by those before us, we have the privilege of having more rights than other people did prior. And I think that because we have more rights now, we're able to really address like those systemic issues that weren't able to be addressed just because the goals had to be different at that time. Like, they had to have different goals just to get basic rights to vote. Like, Black women didn't have full voting rights until the 1960s. Okay, so wanting all of these things is great, and those were still goals at the time, but the objectives had to be different. It can't be about like voting for someone who wants systemic change when you can't even vote. So I think that now that we're at a place where people have more rights generally than previously, we're able to really start to tackle that unjust system, and seeing that the people who are in power don't want to give up that power. So you have to take it back, because that's just where we are. People are very hesitant to give up their power to help the disenfranchised. So knowing that and moving forward from there.
Thank you. I'm going to take back the mic and give it to Diana.
Thank you. Well, Faith brought up some really great points. And there is just one thing I want to add about why I feel that youth are, the driving force for these progressive causes. Because I'd be lying if I said that every single young person had the same political stance. that's a lie. There are still places where we disagree politically. But I can say that, well, actually, I read this really cool study from the Pew Research Center that said that our generation, the post-millennial generation, is the most racially and ethnically diverse generation in the country, because only 52% of 6 to 21-year-olds identify as non-Hispanic whites. And I feel as though for many of us, our identity is the driving force to seeking change. So, even though not every young person realizes how these issues that you mentioned affect them, when I was younger, I let my family's views and environment that I was in cloud my judgment. And when I started doing my own research and making up my own mind on what affected me, as a Hispanic person, as a woman, everything that comes with that, I started getting more involved in pushing for these causes. So I would encourage everyone to do the same, to not let their environment cloud their judgments, to not let what people are saying cloud what they believe in, and just do your own research and fight for what you believe in. But yeah, I did think that it was really cool that the majority of our generation identifies as in some way or shape diverse. So I think that it's really important to fight for what affects us.
Thank you. Giovanni.
Faith and Diana really mentioned some key points. I'd love to dive into both, but I think I really just want to talk about something that I really tend to say is, and Faith mentioned it, I say racism and discrimination were built into the foundation of America, and that's just the reality. I think when it comes to issues, young people, we do know what the issues are. We know how we want to take the approach. We know through the guidance of adults and through the guidance of fellow young people. But I think Faith really mentioned it, and it's something that really just worries me a lot. We can combat these issues on a daily basis, whether we're on Twitter or whether we're in person at a protest. But I think we really need to reflect on how we got here, the systems that brought us to this moment in history. There have been groups and coalitions that have given us the right to vote. I always say I'm thankful for everyone who has allowed me to even be at a symposium like this. If you would have asked me a year ago, I would have not been speaking up like this because I didn't feel it was my responsibility. But the reality is, it's not about me. It's about me, my siblings, everyone else who doesn't have a voice, and we need to be uplifting them to have their voice. And back to Faith's point, I think really just the systems that brought us here, we can't keep them and change the issues. We have to really revolutionize the way we do governance, not just in the United States, but around the world. The systems have failed us, but it's time for us to really reform the systems where it's not saying, oh, there's bad elements in here. Well, how can we change the system to prevent these bad elements from spawning again? I think that's the biggest issue young people need to address really on is, okay, we're gonna combat these issues, but how are we gonna make sure it doesn't come up in 20 or 30 years? I think that's the most important thing young people need to be considering, not just for environmental justice, but for every issue.
Absolutely. And I would be remiss in this conversation about systemic oppression and things like police brutality and youth, and not mention Breonna Taylor. The system did not fail Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor was never the type of person that the system was built to protect. And so as we move forward and we think about justice deferred in Breonna Taylor's case, and that the justice is just deferred from an ethical level, from a human level, but from a systemic level, the way that the case went with, without even charging, without her death even being brought up, or her murder or her killing being brought up as one of the charges, that's just the system. So yeah, thank you all for those answers. So next I want to pivot to we'll bring the energy up. I mean, the energy is strong. We'll bring kind of the mood up a little bit here and talk about your inspirations, either in or outside of the environmental justice movement. Are there perspectives or mentors that have informed the work that you do? And can you speak on these? So I'm gonna go to Diana first here.
Well, I probably have 100 different answers to this question, because the truth is everyone that I've worked with has probably inspired me in some way. The people in this panel right now have inspired me in some way. And even through my work on NCC, like I've been lucky to work with amazing youth like Giovanni, Jonah Gottlieb, adult directors and mentors, including Kimberly Gutzler, Natalie Meebane, the list goes on. There's a ton of people that have inspired me and have gotten me to the place where I'm at today, because like Giovanni mentioned in his previous answer, if you would have asked me a year ago to be on this panel, I probably wouldn't have been able to speak up for myself the way that I am doing right now. And it's because of these people that I've gotten here today. But lastly, I did want to say that, my parents inspire me, even though they're not as passionate about this work as I am. They still sacrificed so much to support me. They came to this country in search of the American dream, and the American dream isn't as promised. There are a lot of problems in America that aren't giving them the life that they expected, and the opportunities that they wish that they had. But I won't give up until their life in this country is as promised by the American dream.
Faith.
So I have a ton of mentors, but I think one of the most influential pieces of information that I've gotten relating to environmental justice was from Dr. Beverly Ward, and she works for like the Quakers in South Florida, and she used to teach at USF in Florida. And I was just really going through it because, when you do this type of work, it can sometimes like bring you down. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're always just looking at like what's wrong with the system and those things, it can put you in a really negative headspace. And I told her about that, and she just reminded me that she said even in her lifetime there'd been so much change, and that's what has been able to keep her moving forward. Because when you look at where we've been and where we've been able to come, even in one generation, like in one lifetime, I think about my grandfather. He's from Arkansas, and when he was growing up, he couldn't even drink from the same water fountain as people. And then he's been able to live, like in his lifetime, he's even seen his own rights expand in that way. So when you think about these things, like we've made so much progress so quickly, but sometimes when you're in it and just looking at the negative, it doesn't feel like that. But if that's what's been able to happen in his life, I wonder what's going to be able to happen in my life, So keeping that in mind, that we've made progress even within people who are still living today, have drastically different lives that they probably never thought they would be able to see this type of progress. So it's possible. So I think that moment for me just really helped me like see that if we're going to come out winning, like we're going to win, and you can't stop the fight now, because we wouldn't be where we were, like where we are today, if people just gave up then. So we have to keep doing the work.
Definitely, absolutely. And I do want to just linger for a second on the point of getting down and kind of feeling, not necessarily even feeling defeated, but just constantly being inundated by wave after wave of the results of these injustices, and the importance of looking to your mentors, looking to sources of strength to kind of bring you out of those depths, because you're not going to be able to see the change and be the change if you're operating as half a person, So thanks for that, Faith. Giovanni.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of people that have inspired me, a lot of mentors, but I think the first one that really comes into mind are my parents. My parents came here with really just said, as Diana mentioned, the American dream. And I think my perspective on the American dream has changed just from the experience my parents told them that while the dream hasn't been really realized for us, make it realized for yourself. And that aspect really just changed my mentality on things, because it's not, don't wait for the American dream to get to you, make the American dream. And I think that really has a tone that, for me, I took it differently. It wasn't, find the opportunities. It's create those opportunities, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. And I think for me, the biggest really just thing that has shaped me up, because I know for me, it was challenging getting involved in this, as mentioned before, that it did take a toll on me the first year and a half when I started doing this type of work, that I felt cornered in, that I felt alone. It wasn't until I started getting involved with organizations like the National Children's Campaign that really just inspired me to say, if there's other young people contributing to this, I should be too. There have been so many young people that have inspired me. I'm pretty sure they know who they are, but they have really just been committed. They know what the issues are. They know how they want to approach this. People like Diana, they know how they want to approach these issues. We know what we want to do. We're committed to the work. And I think this isn't, I wouldn't say this is a career for us. This is a lifestyle we want to live. And I always say that this isn't about a paycheck at the end of the day. This is about expanding voter rights, expanding civil rights, expanding healthcare. These are the things that we want to fight for.
Absolutely. It's powerful. I couldn't have said it any better. Make your own American dream come true. Create it. Don't look for it. Don't look for opportunity. Well, I guess you can do both. So for this second to last question, because I know I have tons of questions that I want to ask each of you, but this is the last official question, and then maybe I'll join the Q&A so I'm not taking up time from the audience. So continuing on this kick, what are some of the successes that you've had in your work? What solutions do you see on the horizon that we're getting closer and closer to every day? And what are as leaders and advocates of this new school of environmental justice, what gives you hope? And so I'll kick it off I'll go right back to you, Giovanni.
Yeah, so I think for me personally, I think the biggest thing that really just refocused the way I approach things was at 17, I was on the city youth commission for my city. I started at 16 years old. And at 17, the biggest joy that was brought to me was being able to pass a climate resolution, the first in that city body. And I think for me, it was just including that racial justice component into it was really what changed me and said, I'm not the only one going through these experiences. There's so many, not just more individuals, but communities. And for me, that was really just mind-blowing. But I think now the things that most inspire me are some of these proposition measures and some of these local ballot measures that have really just made it onto a progressive ballot, is what I call them. Here in the city of Oakland, we have an initiative that is really just going to expand voting to young people, where 16 and 17-year-olds can vote for their school board members. I know while for some people that may seem as a little step, I think that's the approach we have to go. Small steps are what going to make the difference. If we take that big leap and make a mistake in the middle, we're going to have to come back and fix it. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but we need to be wise about the approach we take now. And approaches like expanding voting age for so many young people, I think that's a great step, including Proposition 15, which is one of my favorite measures on the California ballot. Billions of dollars for education. Education is the foundation to our future and the future of generations to come. So I think that's the most important thing we need to be doing. That's what really is, for me, that's what success is. Success is not just improving on what is made, but expanding on what we have currently. Because we know what we currently have isn't working for a majority of us. And we need to make sure we expand it so it includes all of us, but not just in the outcome, in decision-making rooms and drafting policy.
Excellent. Diana.
Well, I've lived a pretty short life. I'm looking forward to a ton more successes in my life because, as Giovanni said, this isn't a career. This is sort of a lifestyle. I really like that, by the way. I'm going to take that. Well, I'd say that recently I've gotten really happy and even more inspired to continue doing this type of work because I've been getting these little messages on social media. Basically, I strive to educate people rather than shame or judge them for not being educated on all these issues, because I understand that there is disparities in education and lack of access to information. So what I try to do, and I do my best to do this, is to inform people on social media on the issues that I care about, whether it's climate change, whether it's any political issue that I'm passionate about. And I've been getting these little messages from people saying that they're inspired by people that try to educate people, because at the end of the day, not everyone knows about these issues. So by expanding the people that actually care about them and actually fight for them, we're doing so much more than I ever thought I could. I also got a message from someone the other day that told me that a few years ago he had a specific political stance, and he was passionate about that because his family and his environment affected him, which is something that I talk about all the time, about how these the people around you and the environment you're in can definitely cloud your judgment. And he told me that once he started doing his own research and finding out more information is when he actually changed his views to what he thought represented him the best. And I think that that's ultimately the goal. It's to really educate yourself, to really fight for what you believe in. I know I've mentioned this a few times throughout the panel, but that's what I call, the ultimate success in what I try to do. It's making sure that people have the opportunity to change what they don't think is right, and to realize that some of these things affect them. Some of the things built into the system, some of the things that are prevalent even in our own backyard. So this is just a small success, but I hope to see many more of these throughout my life. Thank you.
No, definitely. Don't diminish your successes. That is powerful. I mean, so many people are not only have been where you were, where you felt like you were standing by and not able to kind of have any impact on the system. Not so many people have been there before, but so many people are still there today. And so you and, you know, the rest of the panelists and other environmental leaders in this movement, youth leaders in this movement, are the guiding light, are that beacon. So even if the successes seem to you a little bit small, you know, add like times 10, because for everyone else looking on, that's the real value. Faith, I'll switch over to you.
Yeah, so I would say that for me, like some of my, like what I find to be successful is that when I first started doing this work, like I was very hesitant to kind of like disrupt the status quo, because that's just not the way I was taught to approach these issues. And even when I started to learn about environmental justice, it was just like one lecture, well, actually like half a lecture. And I would say that one of the things that I've really enjoyed is being able to be confident and bringing up these conversations. Like when I'm in class, I bring this perspective to every conversation because it needs to be addressed. And I'm glad that I'm there. Like, and if there's no seat at the table, I'll force myself to sit at that table and have these conversations. Like, I think it's very important that I'm able to bring it up, because there's not a lot of people who look like me doing this type of work in this space. Like I go to a PWI, I went to PWI for undergrad. So seeing that there's really not that many people who look like me bringing these ideas up, and I'm glad that I have the privilege to be able to do it and that I'm comfortable enough to be able to do it, because there's other people who would like to be able to address some of these issues that don't feel safe enough to do so. So I'm glad that I have the access to be able to bring some of these things up. And I've been able to organize some really cool events on campus as well. So yeah, with Yan's help, yeah, we've been able to do some really cool stuff on campus for people to get the community engaged. So it's just things like that.
Absolutely, thank you. And I would say we're in unison, co-leadership there. So you don't have to thank me. I have you to thank for a lot of things. And just to kind of, for the benefit of the audience, Faith, can you talk a little bit about some of the events that we've been able to kind of do to raise the profile of EJ here at UMD?
Okay, yeah. So the organization that we're talking about specifically on campus at UMD is 17 for Peace and Justice. So for events that we've organized a film screening last year. That was really cool, with the panel session afterwards about the impacts of factory farming in communities of color. We've gone to a EJ symposium in North Carolina. We have meetings where we just get together to talk about EJ. Hopefully this semester we'll be able to go and do like some direct activism. We've trying to get that sorted out, but it's a really welcoming space for students. And we've done like different tabling events. That was super cool. So we're navigating the COVID space, but we do try to have like a very active presence on campus to let people know like we're here as a resource and there's people doing this type of work to engage. So it's awesome. Feel free to join us. You'll like it, I promise.
Thanks. And kind of echoing something that you said in your initial response, I'm reminded, and I never thought I would be quoting TI in a professional academic session, but you know, I was watching a summit about police violence and kind of these same issues, these same barriers, systemic oppression, and he said, you know, we don't want a seat at the table. We want the whole TI, colorful language, table, because y'all have had the table for this long and the table's on fire. So give it to us and let us do better with it. So thank you for that, Faith, and for the plug. 17 for Peace and Justice is also a co-sponsor of this event. And then also a shout out to the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network. Their summit, their annual summit is actually going to also be a multi-day event starting today, this afternoon. So we won't be too hurt if you leave us, as long as you're going over to the EJ Summit. That's one of the oldest, if not the oldest, ongoing environmental justice summits convenings in the country. So shout out to Naima Muhammad and the rest of the team there down south. So now I'd like to open it up for audience questions. Thank you all panelists. I might have a few of my own questions that I sneak in if the audience is a little slow to throw down. But the first question I see here is from DC. So the question goes, when we meet members in the EJ communities who have limited time and bandwidth, how can we support that disconnect while still reaching our shared goals of changing environmental injustices, i.e., IME, EJ members aren't able to free up bandwidth to do much organizing because they have a lot more important distractions on their plate. So I'll popcorn this out.
I would like to answer that question. I think it's really important when you go to EJ communities to see how they would like to be served. So I know we're all passionate about these issues, but when you're going into community that you don't belong to, seeing like what they want you to do and what tools and services you can provide to them to help them get to the goals that they have for themselves. So if that's what you're noticing, you should definitely connect with that community and see that and make it known that you're there for them and seeing what they would like you to do to help them in their situation. So kind of like shifting that narrative a little bit, because it is a shared goal. And if they're not able to like free up that bandwidth, like you mentioned, they might have their own ideas for what issues they want you to address. And I think taking their priorities for what they have and what they want to achieve and putting that at the forefront, and then sometimes putting your own perceptions of issues and your own concepts of environmental justice and really focusing on what justice looks like to them and seeing how you can serve from there.
Thanks. Giovanni or Diana, do you want to add anything there?
Diana, would you like to go?
Well, thanks for putting me on the spot. I don't know how I could possibly follow with Faith's answer. That was amazing, and I feel like she addressed all the key points. I mean, in my personal experience, I live in a community where, it's a working class community, and not everyone has the time or bandwidth to get involved with these issues. Even my own parents, who have like 2 part-time jobs, they don't have time to get involved with these issues. But as Faith mentioned, these people have their own issues that they find important to them. And again, it's important to connect to see what at least what I can do to help my community. And I think that's why I took, why I started getting involved in this work, because if my community isn't going to speak up for themselves, I want to be the voice that gives them that opportunity.
I think for me, one of the things that was really important was something that Faith mentioned, and it comes to contributing to a movement and organization, or just in general. I think one of the things that I found beneficial is that when I want to go somewhere new and explore different aspects of really just social movements, the first thing I go isn't just say, okay, what can I do here? I listen to the people that have already been here fighting this fight, because my goal isn't to change it. My goal when I do organizing is, okay, not I'm going to change this, I want to change that, is how can I be of use to you? How can I be of service? What do you need from me? Because I think that's an aspect that is really forgotten nowadays, but in certain aspects, because we want to go up to places, as Faith mentioned before. I mean, one of the biggest things is really just when we find that our seat isn't made at the table, you bring your own chair, you make that seat available, and you bring everyone else with you. But I think that also has to include listening. We need to make sure to listen to people who've lived through these experiences, who have struggled through these experiences, because ultimately they know what they're talking about. I think that has to be our priority, is when we go into a new space, listen first before you just jump to the conclusion that this needs to change.
Absolutely. And I mean, we have a lot of time on the clock because unfortunately Wawa wasn't able to join us. So I'm gonna take her seat at the table and for my part, just speak to this question in terms of everything that the panelists have said is 100%, 110, 200% correct. The system has, and there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen because the system, as you know, puts us from the academic side, puts us in a position of power where we feel that our demands and our needs are, you know, above what the community, and we feel it leads us to feel like we're doing some great favor by coming in and trying to do this work. But first, absolutely, Giovanni, you have to listen. You know, that system is a colonial system. It's an exploitative system in communities. And so when you come in and you come in to listen and you come in to hear, then you can actually start walking that back and do some of this restorative science. You know, we talk about restorative justice, but what about restorative science? Where you're actually trying to meet the community where they are. That's my 2 cents there. And I encourage people, please go ahead and add your comments, your questions to the Q&A. I see a few now in the chat popping up. So let's see. And sorry if I can't see the full names. I think I see Selena asks, the Montgomery County Council recently passed racial equity and social justice legislation. How can this issue be integrated in the work of local county councils? And this is a Maryland context. So maybe Faith, if you pick that up.
So one thing that I do want to say about this, I think it's really powerful to see, especially in terms of like legislation, to see that this has been an example elsewhere, because people can use that as precedent to say like, this is what other people are doing. It's possible, we should do that here. So I think it's really good that they're already doing that type of work. And I think for people who are involved, I'm not from Montgomery County, I'm from Howard County, but I think for people who are interested in like seeing that type of work be repeated in their local county councils, you have to demand it. Because again, like what we've been talking about is like the system is not designed to protect certain people. Some people's lives are inherently valued less under the current system we have. So if we're just moving with the status quo, racial equity will never be a part of the conversation. So you have to really force that conversation to happen and say, this is what we want, you serve us, and this is how we're gonna get things done. So really pushing your officials to require them to include these type of outlooks is going to be important moving forward. But I think it's good that these things are happening locally, like in my own backyard, you know, because it's going to take more than just one person, more than just one type of action. And again, to a point I brought up before, it has to be a multi-pronged approach, because legislation is good, but you're also creating legislation in a colonialized, oppressive, racially unjust, sexist, cis-classist system. So that can't be the end, like that can't be the end all be all is the legislation, because even legislations can still be biased. So looking at things holistically and like one solution is not going to be the entire answer you're looking for. So it's going to have to be a collection of different actions to create real equity and real justice in a community.
Absolutely. Giovanni or Diana, do you want to add anything there?
I think the biggest issue, which Faith mentioned, was really just the local level. For me, the local level is where I started, and I think it's, as mentioned before too, that it really is where the biggest impact is made to our daily lives, because the reality is city council members, and whether they be your city or your county levels, they really just do shape the way you live, whether that be through taxes or reforming your police department. I think that's the biggest thing I encountered. And depending really the size of your city, it's a lot easier to get involved. I got involved by simply commenting what I didn't like about an elected official on their profile, and that's how I got involved. I think we have to be willing that when it comes to elected officials, we shouldn't be scared of calling them out. I think that's part of our responsibility as voters is if we want to vote them in, we can vote them in. But if they're not living up to the promises, we either vote them out or hold them accountable.
Thanks, Giovanni. Go ahead, Diana.
All right. I'm not from Maryland, but I did live in Northern Virginia for 2 years. So I'm a little familiar with Montgomery County. I was in Fairfax though, and I think it's great that that there's a local legislature like this that's going on and happening in Maryland. I wish that every local city council could do the same and follow this example. But I think that it's important to bring up these issues to your local representation. I wasn't always aware of that, like the fact that I could just, call a meeting any of my local offices of that, and I didn't always think of that, but now that I am, I try my best to when I feel like an issue being represented at the table or isn't being talked about by your local representation, to bring it up to them and to actually do your part to change that issue. So like Giovanni and Faith have both mentioned, local level is definitely helps, your community a lot more than the federal level. So it's always important to bring up these issues, and it's always important to advocate at the local level.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we've got two similar, or I guess kind of two cascading questions. So Jay Monteverde asks, what campaigns or specific issues are you all working on that you'd like to let folks know about? And then also in the chat, Rebecca says, what are your priorities for the next 4 years, or even thinking more soon, near term, with the next administration? So first, what are you currently working on, and then what are your future ambitions? And I'll go to Giovanni.
Yeah, well, to start off, thank you for these questions. Really makes me reflect on the next couple of years of my life, and that's always an interesting aspect to really just look at. Well, right now I'm the Director of Education for the National Children's Campaign, and my main focus right now at this moment is ethnic studies in education and in core curriculum, because I've been having discussions with someone where someone says, why don't students feel connected to the curriculum right now? Because it's not our curriculum, it's not our history. And I think that's a reality. We need to accept that a Eurocentric curriculum in education is doing more harm than good. And it's ultimately what will impact not just the social movement right now, but the social movement in the future. So right now, that's what I'm doing, as well as on social media. I'm making sure people get registered to vote. I actually made a voter guide for my state, my county, and my city. And I think when it comes to the context, because this is really what I've been thinking about the next 4 years under the next administration or the current administration, I think the biggest thing is that my goal really isn't to make sure they're an unsuccessful president. My goal is to continue building coalitions, because the reality is this: coalitions outlast any administration, any 4-year president or 8-year president. Our coalition is going to be here after any election day. That's the biggest thing that I think everyone needs to consider. A president is only in a term for a certain amount of time. Our coalition is a lifelong effort. And I think that's the biggest thing I'm going to be working on is, of course, making sure our education is equitable and is really just including everyone, but also making sure we have strong coalitions with strong foundations, whether that be in our city, our county, our state, and across the country, and even across the world. I think that's the biggest thing we need to do. Whether it be another 4 years of the current president, my efforts will continue to be the same, to continue to advocate, promote, to legislate at local levels. And if it's a Biden administration, that's the same thing. Our fight, just because of the president, will continue to stay the same, because our voices still matter in the discussion, no matter who's elected.
Woo! Yes, brother. Yes.
That was fire.
Yeah. Faith, why don't you go ahead?
So for I'll start with the future. One of the things I'm really interested in is the intersection between mass incarceration and the environmental justice movement. specifically because when you look at like marginalized communities, which the EJ movement often does, you don't really hear people talking about those that are incarcerated. And especially when you look at like forced prison labor, the types of conditions that prisoners are subjected to, the fact that certain communities are over-policed, even though crime is like fairly consistent among all demographics. So you have to look at like, okay, who are the people being forced into this system? Who are the people being forced to be subjected to these horrible living conditions without basic human rights? And those human rights violations manifest themselves post-incarceration. And that's an environmental justice issue. The fact that there's prisons without air conditioning in Florida, and it's over 100 degrees outside, that there's prisons without heat in New York, that prisoners have been forced to like create PPE and have had very high COVID rates and can't actually use any of that protective equipment. Where are prisons located? Prisons don't get evacuated during natural disasters in hurricane season in Florida. So who's being left behind? And that needs to be part of the conversation. To me, I would like to explore that intersection and really make that community brought into the conversation, because for a lot of times, like, prison is out of sight, out of mind, which is the way it's designed to be. Like, you incarcerate people, put them, isolate them from the rest of society, and then whatever happens to them there is just what happens to those that are incarcerated. But changing that narrative about like the way we think about incarceration and the connections between environmental injustices and people who are incarcerated still have human rights. You know what I'm saying? And that tends not to be the way we think about the criminal justice system. You can even call it a justice system at all. So that's where I'm headed in terms of future work. And currently, my work kind of does like a similar thing. And what I'm studying is more so looking holistically at just the ways that we talk about environmental justice. What's being brought up? What are we addressing? And how we're talking about EJ, what things are we not talking about? And one of the things I think is important to bring to this conversation is a lot of times when we talk about environmental justice, you also don't really talk about whether communities themselves consider themselves to be impacted by EJ issues. And that's not always the case. Some communities take on hazards and then don't identify as being impacted by an EJ issue, because there's a lot of stigma associated with being identified as an EJ community in terms of like property rates can go down, there can be divestment, people might flight when people find out that there's these hazards. So as there's benefits of being associated, like identifying a hazard in your community so that it can be addressed, there's also negative impacts associated with having that same hazard be identified in your community. So making sure that when we talk about EJ, we're addressing that everything's not always peaches and cream after we identify these communities, especially if you just leave them high and dry and say like, there's this hazard and then leave. What happens after that? So looking at some of those underserved intersections that we don't tend to think about when we're addressing environmental injustices.
Thank you. Diana.
I think the first question you mentioned was, what are we working on right now? Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, but I think that's something that hasn't been mentioned a lot, within the environmental justice community, is the fact that the pandemic that we're experiencing right now, COVID-19, like, it is an environmental justice issue, even if you don't see it that way. Like, it is, and it's definitely connected to it, because a lot of communities are facing, higher COVID cases and higher COVID deaths because of environmental issues that were there before the pandemic even began. So that's something that I'm working on right now, because it's definitely affecting my community a lot more than I ever expected, because my community, my city, Hialeah, it's 94% Hispanic. I've already mentioned this in the past, but we're also seeing, extreme COVID numbers. Like, we've had one of the most in our state, and we only have 200,000 people living in this city. I had COVID. My dad had COVID. My dad's an essential worker. He has 2 jobs. He didn't take one single day off of work since the pandemic began. His job never required him to have a COVID test. he literally works for the city, and his job never required him to have a COVID test. They never told him to do it. And when he actually did want to get tested, he had to wait a month to get tested. And for me, I searched everywhere trying to find a testing location, but I couldn't find a place for over a month. And once I finally went to the emergency room and had to pay $250 out of pocket or something like that because of my insurance copay, the test came out negative because I had already passed COVID. So you can definitely see how much it's impacting communities like mine. And that's something that I am focusing on right now. And I really want to continue working with this issue and bringing it to a lot more people's attention, because people aren't realizing that even now, when there's a lot less restrictions, COVID is still here. Essential workers still exist. Even now that jobs are open, people like my dad still exist that have to go into work every day. They never stopped working. They had to risk, getting infected, infecting other people, and possibly losing family members because of that reason. So a lot more people need to be talking about this right now. It's not over simply because our ignorant government told us that bars and clubs and gyms and shopping malls are now open. That didn't stop the virus, and it's definitely not going to. So yeah, that's something that I'm working on. And as for the question, what are my plans for the next administration? Well, we still don't know, what's going to happen in the next 4 years. That can definitely decide a lot of things. And obviously COVID is still an issue, and it's looking like it's going to be an issue going into next year. So that's something that I won't stop working on. But as for climate change, between the two political, Biden has the Biden plan for climate change, and we're still waiting to see if President Trump has any sort of plan relating to climate change. So within the next 4 years, what I plan to do is to continue my work in that field and to advocate as much as I can, not only on the local level, but also at the federal level, to make sure that the issues in many environmental justice communities are being addressed. So yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you all. Giovanni, have we heard from you yet on this question? I think we did. Yeah, we started with you, then went to Faith, then went to Diana. So we have, let's see, about 8 minutes left in this session. So if there are any burning questions, please type them into the Q&A. What I want to do right now is just thank the three of you so much for being available, for making yourselves available and being here to have these important conversations about environmental justice, about youth empowerment, about the future. So, I'll clap on behalf of everyone else in the attendee list, because of course they're all muted. But thank you very much. And if you have any final words or final thoughts that you want to share with the rest of the audience here, in any order.
Could I go ahead? To start off, I really want to just thank all of you for the opportunity to be here. I consider this a privilege and a true honor to be here. I think this is still, it doesn't feel real to me in the aspect that I'm 19 and still doing this work, and I've been doing it since I was 16. And I really just want to say, I don't see an age where I'm stopping. As I mentioned before, this is a lifestyle I want to live in. This is really just, this for me is my purpose, not just being in places like this, giving these discussions, but also making sure that there's more people in the rooms and these discussions. I think one of the things I also want to say is to the young people out there who may be watching is, if you feel alone, just remember you're not alone. There's people like us. I know it may seem challenging, but I think one of the biggest things we can use right now is social media to connect with people and really just connect with adults. I think that's one of the things I've been doing. And I know election day is so close. So if you haven't registered to vote, remember there's different rules also to set in your states where you can show up and still vote the day of. But please check your vote and your voter registration. Make sure it's up to date. Make sure you know all the policies. Make sure you vote by November 3rd, because I don't know how to state this, but everything is on the line. All of our movements are on the line. Everything we've been fighting for, not just during these past few years, but everything since the foundation and even before civil rights movement, we've been fighting for it, and it's all on the line this election. It is so critical that you get out to vote, that you make sure your family gets out to vote, and it's really just important to no matter what the results are, you continue to fight. Even if it's a president you agree with slightly, our fight has to continue. And I think those are the words I really just want to leave on with. And I'm thankful for being here.
Thanks, Giovanni. Diana?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off of what Giovanni said. I think that it's really important that we show out for this election. It's definitely a turning point in the face of justice. So thank you for bringing that up, Giovanni. And I also wanted to mention that, you know, even if you can't vote, like you need to encourage other people to vote, your family, your loved one, your friends. And also something that I actually learned recently and I wasn't aware of, which is definitely my bad. You know, if you're 16, you can definitely research your state's laws and see if you can pre-register to vote. I was actually not aware of this. And so recently in Florida, you can pre-register to vote at 16. And by doing so, you can also volunteer to be a poll worker in your area, which is something that I hope to do. So yes, please show up for this election. Please register to vote. If you're younger than 18, please do your research. Please research policies, candidates, and do your part to affect change.
Thank you. We'll close out with you, Faith.
Okay, so mine's going to be a little bit different. Yes, vote, but I think for everyone, regardless of age, I think we should all be committed to learning and committed to unlearning some of these like biases like that we have, and just like make yourself a lifelong learner, because if you really want to be able to influence change, you have to be aware, self-aware, and aware of the issues at hand. So just be committed to always trying to expand your understanding of issues, seeing perspectives, be open-minded. You have these dialogues with other people, and just be willing to decolonize your thinking and decolonize your mind, and understand that, you know, some of the things that we've been taught haven't been taught in a way that benefits the people who have been most impacted by issues. And knowing that that's where you are, being proactive in where you seek information and how you understand information and interpret information, being critical, like critical thinking, but just continue to learn. And the more you know, the more you realize what you don't know. So there's always a great way. There's always more learning to do. And I'm just so thankful I got to be a part of this panel and had this opportunity.
Thank you, Faith. Absolutely. Just hearkening back to what Jackie Patterson, our 9th Siege lecturer and keynote for our event, said, and she quoted Bob Marley. You know, we have to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, and that's exactly what you were talking about. And I think that's exactly what all four of us have been talking about for this last hour and a half. So with that, thank you all. I am now going to turn to some logistical, not issues, but logistical notes for the rest of the day. So panelists, feel free to turn off your video or leave it on. It's up to you. So from this